Okay, so we've got a stack of legal documents here from the High Court of Guyana. Looks like it's all about land acquisition. The government's claiming land for public projects. And we've got citizens pushing back. Definitely some David versus Goliath vibes going on here.
What's really interesting about these cases is that they all come down to one key conflict: the government's power to acquire land for what they claim is the public good versus an individual's right to own property.
Yeah, you can't just bulldoze someone's house because you're building a bridge, right?
Yeah.
So where does Guyanese law actually stand on all of this?
Well, Article 142 of the Constitution is key here. It's like a safeguard for property owners. Basically, it says that if the government wants your land for public use, they have to provide fair compensation.
Okay, Article 142, got it. But fair compensation. That seems pretty subjective. Like, who gets to decide what's fair? And speaking of which, one of these cases involves the Attorney General trying to get land for that new bridge across the Demerara River. And they're saying they need the land immediately, like right now, even before they've settled on a final compensation amount with the owners. Is that even legal?
That's where things get really interesting. See, the government is relying on Section 7 of the Land Acquisition Act, which basically says that once they've made an initial offer, they can take possession of the land, even if the final amount is still being disputed.
Hold on, so they can just take the land without agreeing on a fair price?
That's what the property owners are arguing. They're saying, hold up, Article 142 of the Constitution, fair compensation comes first.
So it's a legal showdown. You've got the government pushing for development and progress, and on the other side, individuals fighting for their rights. A real game of tug of war. Before we get into the individual cases, can you explain this interim payment strategy the government's using? What's that all about?
Good catch. The government is essentially saying that they are playing by the rules. They're arguing that by depositing money with the court while the final amount is being figured out, they've satisfied that subject to payment part of the law.
So it's like, we'll pay you later. I don't know if I'd love that deal. So let's talk about Joan Stewart's case. What's her story?
Joan Stewart's case really exemplifies this entire conflict. Imagine you're in her shoes, you own a piece of land, and suddenly the government tells you they need it for this massive bridge project.
I'm guessing they're not offering her, like, prime beachfront property in return.
Not exactly. The documents really stress the urgency of the situation. Apparently, the government has contracts with these Chinese firms, and any delay means penalties. So they're really playing up that national importance angle to justify pushing for immediate possession.
And what about Joan? What are her concerns about all of this?
Well, the documents don't exactly give us a full biography of everyone involved, but you can read between the lines. It's clear that one of Joan's main concerns, and this is a common one in land acquisition cases, is whether the compensation offered truly reflects what her property is actually worth, not just the market price, but also its personal value to her.
Right. How do you put a price on something you poured your heart and soul into? So we've got Joan and the bridge. What about Wilfred Bramford? What makes his situation unique?
Wilfred's case really throws a wrench into this whole fair compensation thing, you see. He actually hired his own independent assessors to value his property, and their estimate was way higher than what the government initially offered.
Oof. Awkward. That's got to sting. It's like being on one of those house hunting shows. And the expert's appraisal is totally off, so. Clash the valuations. But did Wilfred's lawyers find anything in the documents that could actually help their case? Like any interesting legal precedents?
They did. And they got strategic. They didn't just limit themselves to Guyanese law. They actually looked at regional and international cases to find support for their argument that you can't just take possession of land before agreeing on a fair price.
So building a global case for property rights, pulling from different legal systems. Smart. What kind of cases did they unearth?
One example is this case, Monica Thomas. It went before the Caribbean Court of Justice, and it really emphasized the importance of sticking to those official guidelines for land acquisition, putting negotiation and fair compensation front and center.
So a regional precedent saying, hey, Guyana, your neighbors are watching you, make sure you're following the rules. Did they find anything from further afield, like maybe a case from the UK?
They did. They went all the way back to World War I, citing a UK case about this requisition hotel, De Keyser's Hotel. The big question was whether the government could use these emergency wartime powers to basically bypass the usual process for compensation.
Wow. National security versus individual property rights. What happened?
The government initially won, but then the Court of Appeal overturned it, saying that even during a crisis, you can't just ignore fundamental property rights. Compensation is key.
Powerful stuff. Some rights are so fundamental they can't just be ignored. even in extreme circumstances. Did their legal research dig up any other interesting cases?
Yeah, they also cited a U.S. case, Stringer v. United States, where the court emphasized that just compensation isn't just a suggestion, it's a core principle. And there's a very specific process the government has to follow.
So they're basically saying even the United States, with its long history of eminent domain, takes this seriously. Any other international examples?
One more, and this one's a big one. From the European Court of Human Rights, the case JRV United Kingdom. It really hammered home the point that fair compensation is absolutely essential for protecting property rights. And it can't just be some ridiculously low offer. It has to be made in good faith.
They really did their homework, didn't they? Caribbean cases, UK cases, U.S. cases, even European law. So what did the Guyanese court think about all of this? Did the government get away with this pay-you-later strategy?
This is where it gets really interesting. The court actually sided with the respondents, Joan, Wilfred, the estate. They said, nope, fair compensation has to come first. They weren't buying the government's argument that just depositing some money into an account was enough.
Wow. So a big win for the little guy. Sounds like the court really drew a line in the sand. Development's important, sure, but not at the cost of running roughshod over people's rights.
Exactly. The court basically said that you can't just twist that subject to payment clause to get around those fundamental constitutional rights. And remember, this is with all the pressure of these big infrastructure projects, international contracts, all of that. It's a strong statement about the balance of power.
It seems like the court recognized that letting the government take the land first and figure out the price later, that could lead to some seriously unfair situations for everyday citizens.
Absolutely. They saw right through that. They recognized how much potential there was for abuse. Because if the government can just throw money at a problem without going through a proper valuation process, well, that sets a dangerous precedent. It lets them bully landowners into accepting less than what their property is actually worth.
It really highlights why having a strong and independent judiciary is so vital, especially in a nation like Guyana that's in the midst of such rapid development. So the court said, nice try, government, but fair compensation comes first. What happened next? Did this ruling change how Guyana approaches land acquisition now? So the court said, nice try, government, but fair compensation comes first. But what happened next? Did this landmark ruling actually change how Guyana approaches land acquisition?
That's the million-dollar question, right? What happens when a government that's used to getting its way suddenly hits a roadblock like this?
Because they were probably hoping those subject-to-payment loopholes would work in their favor.
Exactly. But these rulings really threw a wrench in that plan, and I think it forced them to reevaluate their whole approach.
So less because we said so, and more, here's why this land is important, and here's how we're going to make sure everyone gets a fair deal.
Precisely. Imagine if, right from the start, the government sat down with the communities, explained the importance of these projects, and then actually made a real effort to negotiate fair compensation.
It's true. Sometimes a little bit of honey goes a long way.
Exactly. And it's not just about being nicer. We're actually starting to see more concrete changes in how land acquisition is being handled.
Like what?
Well, there's a much greater emphasis now on impact assessments, for one, and they're exploring different options for these projects. Like, are there ways to achieve the same goals, but with less displacement?
So it's not just about building a bridge at any cost. It's about considering the human impact as well.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance where progress benefits everyone, not just a select few. And I think these rulings have really empowered individuals and communities. They're not afraid to hold the government accountable now.
That's huge. A win for democracy and for property rights.
Absolutely. These cases were about more than just pieces of land. They were about making sure those fundamental constitutional rights are protected, even when it's inconvenient for the people in charge.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening, really. We've uncovered a pivotal moment in Guyana's journey as a nation. Thanks for guiding us through it all.
My pleasure. It's fascinating to see how these legal battles can have such a ripple effect. And for everyone listening, remember that even though the court ruled in favor of Joan, Wilfred, and the estate of Marianne Fredericks, this story isn't over. Keep an eye on future development projects in Guyana. Ask questions. See if those in power have actually learned from these landmark cases. Because at the end of the day, balancing the need for progress with the protection of individual rights, that's an ongoing conversation, and it's one that affects all of us.
Connect with us on social media and let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, stay curious.